How many of you would like me to use archaeology to prove that the Book of Mormon is true? You're going to be so disappointed. Let me tell you why. The first thing is I intentionally use the word prove. There's only one way to prove that the Book of Mormon is true, and that's to have the Spirit testify to you. If the Spirit testifies that it's true, it will be true no matter what anybody says. I have an interesting situation in my family. I really love to study Mesoamerica and the Book of Mormon, and I get really excited about little things, and I will explain it to my wife. And she smiles at me, and she says, "That's nice. Who cares?" Because for my wife, the Book of Mormon is true, and that's all that matters. So, what are we going to do? If that's all that matters, I'm done, right? There is something else we can do. Two things. One, we can learn how to defend the Book of Mormon as an ancient text when people try to tell us that it isn't. And the other, that's more important for us, is that we can learn how to understand those people, how they lived, what they were like, and why they did the things that they did. And sometimes, when we find the right place and the right culture, it will explain things about the Book of Mormon that otherwise we don't understand. So, we want to take a little bit of time and look at those two questions. For the critics of the church, this is the question I get a lot. Have we found any Nephite cities? And they'll say, well, of course we haven't. There isn't a single person in Mesoamerica who looks like a Nephite. How many of you know what a Nephite looks like? If you don't know what a Nephite looks like, you don't know if you haven't found one. Okay? The problem with answering the question about a Nephite city is that we have no good idea of what a Nephite city might look like. How many of you have pots and pans in your kitchens? Okay? How many of them are Mormon pots and pans? Did you buy them at the Mormon store? Are they completely different from anything your neighbor has? In 1,000 years, when they see your version of the Roman wall, will they know it was a Mormon wall and not a Roman wall? If they don't put it on the building, if they don't write it, we don't know. The hard thing about everything in Mesoamerica is that they didn't write it at the time of the Book of Mormon. The writing comes later. So we don't know. People will say, we know the names of these Mesoamerican cities. They're invented names. We gave them those names later. We don't even know what those people called that city. So if that's our problem, how are we going to defend that the Book of Mormon is an ancient document? I'm going to teach you with this picture. What do you see? You see a dog. A dog. Who does not see the dog? Okay, look around. Everybody keep your hand up if you do not see the dog. Look around and see the people who do that, because this is important. Okay? This is the problem that we have when we have evidence for the Book of Mormon. It can be right in front of the faces of the people who are saying that there's no evidence, and I see it, and the neighbor next to me doesn't see it. Okay. That's the head of the dog, the back, the tail, legs. I don't have the translation. So there's the dog. You can see the dog because there is a pattern that is made by the spots. Sometimes you get a big spot. Sometimes you get a small spot. Every once in a while, I will have someone ask me, what is the best evidence for the Book of Mormon? What piece of evidence proves the Book of Mormon? Which dot tells me that's a dog? Yeah, it isn't a single dot. You can take any dot, and if you remove it and put it somewhere else, it won't look like a dog. It's the picture that you make out of all of the spots. And so that's what we want to do, is to put a picture together where it begins to make sense. But it has to make sense with the right dog. I cannot take a piece of one dog and add it to another dog and say this looks like a dog. I can't take a big dog and a little dog and pretend that they're the same. So we have to be careful in how we put it together. And that's part of what we want to do today, is look at some of those reasons why we can think that there is a place that explains the Book of Mormon. Now, everything else I'm going to tell you is what scholars think. This is not church doctrine. If you prefer not to believe me, please believe that the Book of Mormon is true and ignore me. But this is good stuff. Best information we have is that the Book of Mormon would have taken place in this area. This is the Gulf of Mexico. Mexico City is up in here. This is Guatemala, the Yucatan Peninsula. If you remember Mexico looking like a boot, that's the toe of the boot. Most of the Book of Mormon happened in the heel and the ankle. Now, you remember the problem is nobody wrote Nephi slept here. So we have to find another way to make those connections. I think I wrote, wasn't what I was expecting. We'll go here anyway. Okay. If the Book of Mormon took place in this area, it will help us understand a story in the Book of Mormon that otherwise is hard to understand. The Nephites were living in this area in the city of Nephi with the lower oval. That's the right picture. So, Nephites are down here. They leave the city of Nephi. They go up to Zarahemla. After a while, some of the people in Zarahemla want to go home again, so they go back to the land of Nephi. That's when Zeniff goes back to Nephi. His son is King Noah. King Noah's son is Limhi. So we get to the story of Limhi, and his people are in slavery to the Lamanites. They don't like it. So they have this really good idea. They said, let's go back to Zarahemla, get an army, and come down here and wipe them out. So we need to get somebody in Zarahemla to save us. So they get a small group of people, and they say, go to Zarahemla. They probably asked their grandfathers, because their grandfathers had probably been the ones who had come from Zarahemla to go down to the land of Nephi. So these grandfathers say to them, go up into the mountains. You remember we crossed the mountains. Go up into the mountains, find the river Sidon, follow the river Sidon until you come up to Zarahemla on the left. You can't miss it. They missed it. Not only did they miss it badly. They missed it by a long shot. By the time they found somebody, the people they found were dead. They found Jaredites, and they brought things back. How did they miss it? What could they have done to mess up those instructions? You go into the mountains, you find the river, you follow the river. In this area of the world, there are two rivers. This one on the west, in modern language, is the Grijalva. On the right, the Usumacinta. In the mountains, the headwaters of those two rivers are only about 30 kilometers apart. They went up into the mountains, they followed the wrong river. When you follow the river to the end, you end up in an area where the Jaredites had lived. And in Mesoamerica, the people that lived during that time were called Olmec. That's an area where they lived. By this time, the Olmec had died out, and their cultures were gone. So the Book of Mormon's story, if you put it there, makes sense. Not only to tell us why they couldn't find Zarahemla, but to tell us why instead they found Jaredites. Okay. Next thing. This is what I was trying to say when I started talking about not having a sign that says this is the city of Nephi, or this is, Zarahemla city limits. If we're not going to find that, what can we find? We can look at the Book of Mormon itself and see if we see reflected in what's written in the Book of Mormon things that we know were going on at the time. Every time we write something, we reflect the culture that we live in. Sometimes we will make it explicit. Sometimes we just assume that people know what we're talking about, so we don't have to say everything. We can just say, I went to Milan a few days ago. I didn't tell you how. You're pretty sure I didn't walk. If I had been in ancient Nephi, I would have walked. They wouldn't have said that either. Okay? So, we see the stories in the Book of Mormon. Can we find anything behind those stories that help us put the dots together? This is one of the stories. These are about the Moolah Kites. 3 places are important. City of Nephi down here, Zarahemla, and this area up here, which is probably land of the Jaredites. We have the Nephites, who probably land somewhere on this coast. They come up into the highlands because Nephi says they go up. They're there for a while, and then they're kicked out. Now, we know from looking at the chronology in the Book of Mormon that it's somewhere around 200 BC that Mosiah leaves with whoever would go with him. Important time, important date. We also know from the archaeology that right about that time, there was an invasion of Cholan speakers, which is a different language, into that area, and it probably wasn't polite. This is probably an army coming in. So right about the time Mosiah leaves, we have evidence that there's an enemy coming into the area. Yeah, probably a reason he might want to leave. Up in the Gulf of Mexico is probably where the Moolah Kites land. Different coast. When they land in the area where the Jaredites were. And then eventually, they come up the Grijalva River, the Sidon River, which is what the Nephites called it, and they found the city of Zarahemla. When they get there, Mosiah comes, meets with those people, and he says, they've lost their God, and they've lost their language. That's a problem, because they've only been separated for 400 years. 400 years is not long enough to have the same language, Hebrew, split into 2 mutually unintelligible languages. Something else happened. Best explanation, all of this area already had people in it when Book of Mormon people showed up. When the Nephites arrived on that southern coast, they arrived in a land of people that spoke the language Maya. They probably ended up speaking Maya. The Moolah Kites came in the other coast with a people who spoke a language called Soke. Soke and Maya are probably as different as German and Italian. You can't understand each other. You might learn their language, but if you don't know their language, you're not going to understand what they're saying. So, this people speaking Soke comes up and founds the city of Zarahemla. People who might be speaking Maya come up. They're not going to understand each other. Linguists tell us that it is about 200 BC. You remember that's an important date. It's about 200 BC that people who speak Soke move up the Grijalva River and into that area. We also have pottery from Maya peoples who appear to be coming up into that area as well. So we know at that time period we have Maya and Soke interacting. So now we have a place, we have a people, we have the right date. This is what I would call a big spot on the dog, because that's hard to manufacture. Can you imagine Joseph Smith trying to guess that we would eventually come up with that? There are some little spots on the dog, same kind of thing. Alma tells the people that we should not have a human sacrifice. How many of you need to be told that? When you go up for sacrament meeting, don't sacrifice any people. You don't need to be told that. Why does he make sure to tell those people that you don't need a human sacrifice? Because in that area of the world, they did it all the time. In the cultures around them, there were always human sacrifices. In the religion around them, there were human sacrifices. They needed to be reminded that they did not need to do that. Another little spot. Ammon's brothers are captured and taken to Madoni. They're not treated well. They're stripped. They're beaten. These are captives that have been stripped of most of their finery. There's another pot that actually has them completely naked. I decided not to show that one. Their arms are tied behind their backs. In many cases, you can see bruises on faces. They've been beaten. The descriptions that we have of how Ammon's brothers were treated is just par for the course for many of the Maya cultures. It was normal. Ammon got the unusual treatment, not them. They got the normal stuff. Ah, that one. Another small dot. Gid and Tiamner are fighting a battle. They hide underneath the grass. As the enemy comes by, they pop up out of the ground and attack. This is an artist's picture of an Aztec party. And the Aztecs come 700 years after the Book of Mormon, long time after the Book of Mormon. But there is a story that we have in the Aztec writings that describe that tactic. So here we have in the Book of Mormon a military tactic that worked well enough they kept using it for 700 years. This is a Aztec army coming through. One of the types of armor that the Book of Mormon describes, they say they would dress them with thick clothing. That white shirt that he's wearing that's quilted, that's the thick clothing. That body armor was so good that when the Spaniards came with their big, heavy metal, they took the metal off and put those on. They were lighter, and they did a better job of deflecting the arrows. So it was good. You think thick clothing, it doesn't sound that good? It was good. Watching my time. At least one more story, maybe two. This story is King Benjamin. We're trying to understand King Benjamin's speech. Very important speech. He has people and he brings them together and he says, I'm going to make you one people. You're going to get a new name and you're going to be one people. When he speaks to them, he builds a tower. Later, his son Mosiah speaks to a larger number of people, but he doesn't build a tower. Why does Benjamin build a tower? Mosiah doesn't build a tower. They both should have built a tower, right? Okay. We take this story and we put it in Mesoamerica. Here's what should have happened and probably happened for Mosiah. This is a picture of a Mesoamerican city that would have been around at the time of the Book of Mormon. This particular city is larger than what Zarahemla would have been. You see a little courtyard here, a temple in front, All of the temples have stairs going up. The acoustics in these Maya courtyards are usually good enough that when a person needs to be heard, he walks up the steps of the temple and speaks, and everybody below can hear. So, why wouldn't Mosiah need to build a tower? He walks up the steps of the pyramid, and he speaks, and they hear him. So why Benjamin? Another interesting thing about Benjamin. King Benjamin is the only king in the Book of Mormon to abdicate. Everybody else dies as a king. Benjamin says, I'm going to give my son the chance. Never happens again. Hadn't happened before. Why Benjamin? A couple of things probably coincide. The description of his speech seems to be very parallel to the Israelite Feast of Tabernacles, which was a time of renewal. A very important time for Israelites was the Sabbath year, coming after 7 times 7 years, so every 49 years. In Mesoamerica, their century was 52 years long. So we have 100, what we think of as 100 years passing, they had that kind of feeling for the 52 years. It seems maybe that those two things coincided and that this was a time of renewal. And because it was a time of renewal, Benjamin might say, if I'm changing things and I'm making you one people, we can do it now because it's a time of renewal. In Mesoamerica, during these times of renewal, you would put out every fire all through the city and relight them again. You would also build or enlarge a temple. Why didn't Benjamin walk up the steps? Temple wasn't there. Next piece that's interesting. This is how you get the big spots. You put all the pieces together. The city of Zarahemla might be an archaeological site that's known as Santa Rosa. It's now under a lake. They built a dam. There's now a lake there. But they excavated it before the lake came. There was a non-Mormon archaeologist who excavated this one temple. From the pottery that's around and inside the fill on the temple, it seems to date to about the time that Benjamin would have been talking. They didn't put up a sign that didn't say this was the year, so we don't know. But all of the indications are it fits into that time period. When they excavated to the bottom, they found at the very bottom of the temple, there were 2 pits. One of them completely filled with smooth river stones. The other side with sharp gravel. There was an east to west line, and as you know, that's the path of the sun, so this wasn't a mistake. They made sure that there was an east-west line. There were no smooth stones in the gravel. There was no gravel in the smooth stone. And then they plastered over everything and stuck a temple on top of it, and it was buried. And the suggestion was that there were 2 people in that city that came together to show that they were one people at that point in time, which is exactly what Benjamin wanted to do. All right, I'll tell you one and then we'll stop. This is the last one. I wanted to do this one because it's the first time I've told it in public. So you're lucky, you're the first ones. Don't throw anything at me. Here's the next problem I wondered about. You get to the end of the Book of Mormon, and we all know that the Nephites were finally killed off. They've been fighting Lamanites for 1,000 years. And the Lamanites finally say, okay, I'm going to go wipe them out. Why did they change? And why did they change at that time? Why not 100 years earlier? Why not 100 years later? Turns out there's a reason. Down here is the land of the Maya. Up in here is where you'll find the important cities of Tikal, Calakmul, the great big cities that had all of the trade, the ones that were powerful and influential. Up there is the city of Teotihuacan. At this time, the 6th largest city in the world. Important place. Teotihuacan was a military society. They conquered a lot of people. We know from a date that was left in Tikal that in 378 AD, so 378 years after Christ, Teotihuacan came in and basically conquered Tikal. So we know that people from here had come down to there not just to trade, but to really make a connection. Warfare is expensive, so if you're going to annihilate a people, it has to be worth it. It has to be worth the cost of that kind of a war. What could have been that important? At this time in the Book of Mormon, the Nephites are straddling this narrow neck of land. If you're up here and you want to trade with somebody down there, guess whose land you have to go through? If the people from Teotihuacan decided that the Nephites might hurt their trade, now that they've got a presence and they're really trying to kick it up, that's the time period when now they could perceive the Nephites as being dangerous enough to want to get rid of them. The next thing we learn in the Book of Mormon is that Mormon complains that war is different than it's been before. Basically, Mormon says it's not a gentleman's war anymore. We know from history that the people from Teotihuacan fought differently. And there's information from the Maya that indicates that when Teotihuacan arrived, the nature of warfare changed. So Mormon appears to be complaining about the very people who were in that very place at that very time and had a reason to finally want the Nephites gone. Now, does that prove the Book of Mormon? No. What it does, though, you remember when we had people who couldn't see the dog? Show you another picture. This is a picture of a typical house, not a Mormon house. Typical house. So this is the garage. You can see the shadow of the tree in the front yard. What else do you see? You see a face. Who does not see the face? Okay? When I first saw it, I didn't see the face. It took me a while. They told me there was a face there, and I still had to go looking to find it because I saw a shadow. I didn't see a face, I saw a shadow. The eyes, nose, lips, chin. When we have a critic of the Book of Mormon who says to us, I look at Mesoamerica and I don't see anything that looks like the Book of Mormon, they don't see it. That doesn't mean that it's not there. That doesn't mean that the evidence is not there. It means they can't see it because they're missing the pattern. And usually, they're missing the pattern because they haven't read. They haven't looked at the text in a way to find the patterns that show us the face. Once you have seen that dog in that first picture, no matter when you look at that picture again, you will always see the dog. You cannot go back to the time when you didn't see it, because you know it's there. Now that you've seen it, your eyes go to it immediately. That's the way it is with the Book of Mormon. Once you have seen the patterns, it's there. That will help us to know how to defend the text, that it really is ancient. But it also gives us the opportunity to know those people better, to see into their hearts, so that we can feel the blood fleshing through the bodies, and we can know that they were real people. And because we know that they, as real people, could have faith, could believe, we know we can do it. In Jesus' name, amen.